You ready for me, Maggie? Oh, she said just about, just about. Well, meanwhile, I'm just going to say hello to all of you. I know we still have a number of people joining. Chrissy, nice to see you. It has been too long. Hi. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to turn on your cameras unless you want to, because I know many of you right now are multitasking in ways that I never, well, I aspire to be able to do, things like cooking and taking care of kids and dogs and powering down from the day, or still working sometimes. So I just really appreciate the fact that all of you have taken the time to spend with me and with three incredible other women that I just can't wait for you to meet if you haven't already, and hear some of their stories, hear a little bit more about them. So this is going to be a lot of fun tonight. Well, maybe I'm going to kick us off then at 6:36, back to the fact that we all are living very, very busy lives right now. I really want to respect your time and really kick us off and just get us going. Okay, so my name is Cheryl Watson, for those of you that I have not yet met, and I hope that by the end of this conversation, you go and set up time on my website to get to meet with me, because if you haven't yet heard, I am running to be your next mayor of Edmonton. And so I'm really, really excited to be able to take opportunities like this to introduce myself to all of you, and more importantly, introduce you to many of the people that are in my life that I know or have met along my journey. And so that's really what we're doing tonight. I do want to introduce myself to you, but again, I want to be able to also use this platform to extend my network to people in my life that I think are really making a big change and are important city builders for this city. And so that's what we're going to do here tonight. Now, before I introduce them, I'm going to just let you know what the program is. And what's important about this first is that I do want to thank Maggie and Kathy tonight. They're my incredible event team. They're making all of this magic happen. They make that awesome music that we all got introduced to at the beginning happen, and pictures and Zoom, and they're going to facilitate tonight's conversation from a technology standpoint. So thank you to Maggie and Kathy. And thank you for all of the other team members that I have supporting me in my campaign. I could not do this without them. And so I know that some of them are here tonight. And I'm also going to introduce you to my CFO, Lee, a little bit later in the evening. So again, just want to do a big shout out to my team. So our program for tonight, we are going to spend around 30 minutes, 25 minutes just talking really about this idea of challenging status quo, about change leadership, and share some of our experiences with all of you. About midpoint, we're going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some things that are happening with me related to the campaign. And we're going to take a little bit of a break for a couple of minutes, but it's going to be then your chance to get into the chat. Use the first part as inspiration for things that you might want to learn more about, questions that you might have for my other panelists. And so I think it's really great to have you be able to engage in the conversation as well. Then we're going to go back. We're going to continue the conversation, hopefully use some of your questions for inspiration and guidance for the rest of the discussion. And then we're going to end at around, let's see, 8 o'clock. So let's, without further ado, I would love to first introduce these three women and have Maggie and Kathy bring them onto the screen so that they can join us. And while she's doing that, I'm going to introduce them. And so I love to do things in alphabetical order, and so that's where my brain goes. So I'm going to do it that way. So that means that Carolyn Patton is first. And so I'm so proud to introduce Carolyn. We have been friends for more years than I care to share on this Zoom call, but she is the Vice Chair of the Vimy Foundation of Canada. She's the Alberta Chair for the Canadian Forces Liaison Council, and the owner and creative strategist with Patton Communications. She is the recipient of the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers and the Vice Regal Commendation. Big recognition for her important work. Jacqueline Cardinal is the Managing Director of Naheyawin, also Chief Brand Officer at Social Awareness Group and advisor to Spirit Foundation. She recently received a SHEInnovates Award from the UN Women's Global Innovation Coalition for Change. And Funke Olokude is an intercultural relationship facilitator and educator at the Multicultural Health Brokers Co-op. She currently serves on the board of the Edmonton Logos Society and is the convener of a community leadership circle. And in 2020, she was named one of Edmonton's top 40 under 40. So a seriously powerful group of women here that we're going to talk with. But I want to start this evening's conversation with a land acknowledgement. And I want to share a little bit about what this means to me. So recently I registered in the University of Alberta's Indigenous Study 12-week program, and it has been amazing. I am actually shocked at all that I did not know, and have just been so incredibly grateful for this education, and have just met it with full curiosity. And so many times I have to pause it, and then I say to my husband, oh, let me just share what I just learned. So it's been really amazing. And so it makes the land acknowledgement real to me. And so I hope that all of you as well really think about what the land acknowledgement means when you're in a meeting or somewhere where it is used to open a conversation, because it's important and it's meaningful. And so I encourage you to become more educated. I encourage you to be curious as I am, and use this inspiration tonight to go and do that. Jacqueline, I have to share, I also went and joined a Cree for beginners, which turned out to not be for beginners. It was definitely intermediate. And so I stayed in it for 45 minutes and was inspired, and then finally said, I am such a baby in this process. I'm going to go find some other beginners to go and learn from. But anyway, I'm finding all kinds of ways to just educate myself. But so Cree language is definitely not my strength, which means that I am going to use my land acknowledgement in English. So please excuse me. So I want to acknowledge this land, which is known as Beaver Hills House, as the traditional home, gathering place, celebrating place, traveling route of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Nakota Sioux, whose history, language, culture has enriched and makes up our shared heritage. And so I'm so proud to be able to acknowledge this land. Now, we talked about how it would be really great as well for each of you to share a little of your own reflections of land and the acknowledgements we want to make. So I'm going to go to Funke next.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Cheryl. I think for me, it's quite similar to what you shared. I continue to learn every day about what this land has to offer. And I'm situated currently on Treaty 6 territory. And as a newcomer and a first-generation immigrant, I have to say this land also shares in colonial history as well for me. And that informs the work I do every day. And that has made me make a commitment to imbibe in sort of like the teachings and the traditions of its people, past and present, and to carry that as I journey on the land every day.
That was great, Funke. Carolyn, I'm going to go to you next.
All right, Cheryl. I think, land for me is, it's about identity. It's about place. It's about belonging. And I'd say respite. I'd much rather be outside right now than inside, given my druthers. But I think that respite and that sense of comfort that it provides, that's what land is for me. More emotional.
Thank you. Jacqueline.
Me next. I love so much when we really get to kind of like pause and hover over the land acknowledgement, because I think that it's this amazing opportunity for us to remember how we're all connected, which is through this place that we're in. And you know, I've been thinking a lot lately, especially as I've been going outside more and seeing more critters running around and a little bit of green, unless it's just hopeful on my part. But I've just been thinking a lot more about our non-human relations that we share these lands with, and about how you know, they're a part of this this place and a part of our treaty as well. So you know, I'd love to just kind of append to your lovely land acknowledgement and the reflections from Funke and Carolyn, just to acknowledge that we share this place too with our non-human relations of the four-legged, winged, finned, and rooted as well. And so I love to just kind of pause and reflect there. And it just kind of helps me feel a little bit more, I don't know, firmly rooted myself. So thank you for starting in this way.
Thank you to all of you. Thanks. This really was great to hear each of your personal reflections about why that's important. So thanks. Okay, well, this is just the beginning of hearing from these three women. So Monday, for all of you that were on any social media channels at all or paying attention in any way, was International Women's Day. But I really wanted to extend the conversation. And so I really was inspired by this year's theme, which is choose to challenge. And for me, that's really at times what we, I think of when we talk about change leadership as a practice. And so that's going to be the foundation of our conversation today. And so when I was thinking about having this conversation and planning this conversation, I was thinking, who in this city, who are some women that I know in this city that really inspire me through their work? And for different reasons. And so I shared with each of these three women a little bit about what inspired me about their work. And so I'll open that a little bit as well with Carolyn, who has really worked hard to create some new programs and drive change in very traditional military type environments where you don't typically see a woman that comes from a creative agency background really working in that space. And she's got some personal reasons about why that space is important for her. And then I think about Jacqueline, and what I talked to Jacqueline about is what she has been doing is really taking what for many years and for a long time is an isolated conversation on a specific topic, where we talk about Indigenous, the importance of Indigenous learnings and practices, and she's brought it mainstream. So it's in every conversation and Jacqueline is just driving change in that way, in a way that is just so natural and is so welcoming for people. And then I recently met Funke. She was one of the first people that came to my campaign office to talk to me a long time ago when we could still do that. And she introduced herself to me, and through what she was sharing, I was so inspired because she's new to Edmonton. And I was thinking about my own journey and my reliance on networks and relationships and the relationships that I bring, the social capital, that was the word that I was thinking about, that I think sometimes is necessary when you're really leading change. And Funke has done incredible things and yet doesn't necessarily have that strong background that some of us that were born and raised here do. And so I was really inspired by her ability to do that. So there's a little bit about these three women that inspired me. I know that all of you are going to take away a lot of other reasons for inspiration from them. So let's dive right into this. So I would have called myself at some point or another a change leadership practitioner. It was something that I've done it was the common thread through all parts of my career back when I was at Intuit for 15 years. Despite doing many, many different roles, change leadership was always a common thread. And then when I came and declared my intent and desire to stay in Edmonton and to really have my work move our city forward, I founded Innovate Edmonton, and that was a big change as well. And so that was really challenging the way things had been done in the past. So again, common thread of change leadership. And so I just want to kick us off and open the conversation, and maybe I'll go to you, Jacqueline, first to talk about change and from your viewpoint at times, why is change necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first I kind of want to back up. I'm inspired by you talking about learning Cree, because that's kind of the the lens that I feel really honored to be able to use to approach my work in the way that I do kind of anything. So, when I was learning Cree and also feeling like a bit of a, kind of a baby learning, these things, just how to express yourself in this new way. One of the first teachings that I was given as a part of learning Cree was that of the first sacred law that we have as Cree people, which is saāwithiniwak. And if you break down that word, the word which means to love one another, which I think is a really beautiful, obviously, teaching, when we approach our work and living our lives, living in this place in our families and communities, we should always approach first and foremost with that love. And so I really love that. And then the teacher, when he was this knowledge keeper, when he was explaining the deeper meaning, basically broke the word down further, and it really blew my mind. And basically what he explained was that the morphemes of the words, the bits of the word that that saāwithiniwak is made up of, the first kind of core idea that's the core of this word is saagik, which means to sprout or to grow, to change. And I think it really kind of helped me reconceptualize change and growth and engaging in this work as fundamentally an action that has to be rooted in love, and that is an act of love. And so, when I'm thinking about, where does change need to happen, it is kind of through that lens of where is love needed the most. How can, if there is change that is kind of being forced on a group of people in a certain way, perhaps, industries are being disrupted or whatnot, especially in this time of COVID, how can you, bring that core, that symbolic flame back into that area of change? So for me, that's really what I look for. And so that's kind of what came to mind first. I'm so curious, Carolyn and Funke, what you two think as well?
No, I think you're right, Jacqueline, absolutely. And I like how you talked about in a positive way, right? Sometimes when we think about change, it often has a negative connotation, right? People think maybe we're doing something wrong, so therefore we need change, right? But absolutely, rooted in love is always relationships, right? And in relationships, that's where transformation happens. So for change to happen, really, we have to sort of like backpedal, like you're saying, Jacqueline, and root it in like our human interactions in any way, every way, whatever change we're trying to see happen, it has to be sort of like rooted in our relationships. What is happening? What is transforming, not necessarily changing, right? Because oftentimes you think like change equals negativity, right? Therefore, I'm doing something wrong. So reframing it in that way and sort of like putting that lens on it is absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's an old saying that the only constant is change, because if we don't change, we're stagnant. And if we're stagnant, that means that we're not going to grow, we're not going to move forward. But, with that love and that connectivity, I think the more you give, the more you gain. And that's, I think, at the core of what change is.
Thank you for each of your very different but yet related descriptions and how you think about it. Now, I know the three of you well, and I know the kind of work that you're doing. If you don't mind, I talked a little bit about my change leadership background at a high level, but can you talk a little bit about, in your mind, some of the ways that you're driving change and in which areas, and maybe it's a project you've worked on recently, but can you talk a little bit about that? And Carolyn, maybe I'll have you go first.
Sure. Change is, I think it's what's at the core of creativity, because at the heart, I'm a creative director, a creative strategist. I like to create things, and creating entities or creating projects is really about moving things forward. And one of the, I've worked on things that are small and large, but maybe I'll do a micro and a macro thing. And one of the small things, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, Elizabeth Warren in the US Senate, she kept against a vote for Jeff Sessions. And then I think it was Mitch McConnell who said, nevertheless, she persisted. And then she went out into the hall outside the Senate and continued to read a letter written by Coretta Scott King from 1986. And she read it in full. But it struck me, because I watched it on the news, and it hit a chord in me. Nevertheless, she persisted. I'm sure I'm one of a million women that did this. I ran immediately to a t-shirt shop and had it printed on a t-shirt. And I photographed it and I put it on Instagram. And a whole bunch of friends said, where did you get that? And then someone said, you should sell them. And I went, I guess I should. So by the time midnight stroked around, I had a website up and I had an order in for 1,000 t-shirts, of which were getting delivered within 3 days. And I networked with my friend who owned a t-shirt shop. And I said, you know, could you do this for free? Because I'd like to donate all the money to Because I'm a Girl. And all the t-shirts sold. And in that short span of time in a week, we raised a small amount of money. I think it was $5,000 or $6,000. And I just wrote a check to Because I'm a Girl. And I remember them calling me going, who are you? Where did this come from? And, but I just thought I can change something here and raise some money for that, just as a really small example. And I think on a larger scale for many change, I recently was brought in to work on something called the Commonwealth Walkway. And we really changed the way you have an experience in the river valley, and we introduced digital technology. And that's how I met Jacqueline. And that's how I learned about, you know, all these wonderful Cree stories. And we created a video together and content for it. But that is just a collaboration of like-minded people on the same path who are interested in doing something new and different and really changing your experience. And that was on a larger scale. And because I did that, we're now doing that walkway experience at the Vimy Memorial in France. But I could never have done that if I didn't learn from the colleagues and the collaborators on that project for the Commonwealth Walkway. So that connectivity leads from one thing to another.
I remember your t-shirt. I remember
you still have it?
I do not have one. Like, where was I? Like, I remember seeing it, but
I see it every once in a while on someone. I'll go, oh, that's awesome. I should read this one.
Shame on me. Yeah. Funky. Thanks, Carolyn. A very inspiring story, and I'm looking forward to digging into it a little bit. I'm going to have more questions, but Funke, if you can also share some of the things that you've worked on.
I think for me, I've been privileged to share in people's stories. And in sharing in people's stories, I like to sort of like work and design from the margins. So walk my way from the outside in, you know. Oftentimes in the work I do right now in the city, I work with cultural minority and racialized individuals and families. So I'm sort of like helping to make visible some of the invincible complexities and gaps that that sort of like happens in that space and in that world, right? So one of the things I've done in the city that, you know, as Carolyn was speaking, it just jumped into my mind, was sort of like, was something very tiny, but in that time you don't see it, right? But as you go through the process, it starts to get more concrete in your eyes, right? Was sort of like, as humans, we sort of often pack ourselves at extremes, right? We never, on a continuum, we always see the extremes. So always sort of like pack the end and the beginning. But one of the projects I was privileged to work on with at the city level was a housing project, and where we were able to expand the continuum, the housing continuum, not to just see extreme homelessness and homeowners, but also to start to consider those people are in between, especially now during the pandemic, those people who are one paycheck from being homeless. Yeah. You know, oftentimes we forget about those people, you know, and those people are often the chunk of people. How about we start doing some preventive and sort of like early intervention work, you know, and then we got the city, myself and a group of my colleagues got the city to start to pay attention to that group of people. And now during the pandemic, those group of people have become even more important, because right now jobs are sort of, most people are losing their jobs, and those people who were paying 75 to 100% of their rent on of their incomes on rent, and now more precarious housing status, right? So that was something I work with a lot of good-minded, awesome people in the city, both in city leadership right now and community members. And we not only did that sort of like as service providers, we also went to the people, you know, people on the ground who are experiencing those, you know, sort of like one paycheck from homelessness. And we spoke to them, and we made sure their voices were heard in the process. It wasn't just a one-way street. Everybody came to the table to start to figure out how can we sort of like make put some preventative measures on the table to ensure that we started working in this aspect as well. Because if not, we're going to have a housing crisis on our hands very soon, which we already have, right? But you know, to manage that problem effectively. So that's something I'm really sort of like proud of, that I've contributed to the city as well.
Yeah, you should be proud. And you know, for sure you should be proud. And one thing that really struck me that I am such a believer in is having the users help design the programs or services. Back in my Intuit days, we would call that customer empathy, and really having deep customer empathy. And that means bringing your customers in, or the users, or the people that are actually experiencing it. So that was great to hear. And I noticed Abby's here tonight. So Abby was with you when we met the first time. So great to see you, Abby. Hi. Thank you. Jacqueline.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to totally pick up on this storytelling thread that I'm seeing the Carolyn and Funke lay down. Because like, I do feel like that's so much at the core of my work, and what I really love doing is that kind of, you know, I think somebody called it reframing when thinking about change, kind of bringing that love idea back. And I think framing is so important in that way. Anyway, so I do, a lot of my work is really about, I really fancy myself a technologist and a storyteller, kind of those two components together. I do believe that, you know, if we were to expand and kind of dematerialize technology away from kind of, you know, our computers and you know, the wonderful magic of Zoom and all that stuff, and we were to kind of, you know, really recognize that our processes and ways of doing things and the stories that we tell, you know, that these are incredibly powerful things, and they are technologies. It kind of helps me think about how we are, especially my generation of Indigenous people, how we are kind of making the next generation, making it a little bit easier for them to be even more Indigenous than us. And that's kind of the real goal, and that's kind of the, you know, the kind of main trajectory that I'm aiming at. So, you know, I really see this as kind of forming two different kind of pots of work. So one is shifting stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, where we come from, where we're going, that are, you know, perhaps exclusionary, that are perhaps harmful, that perhaps just don't make sense anymore. An example of that is I was collaborating with the Oliver Community League to kind of basically say, hey, this name no longer reflects our community. You know, the namesake Frank Oliver is a really, you know, terrible legacy. He was really a driving force behind the expulsion and removal of the Pappas Chase from their territory that's now in the that we now know as Southern Edmonton. And so working with that community to kind of say, actually in a quite unified way, hey, this isn't really who we are anymore. And so we started this campaign called Uncover Oliver. So it's kind of, again, that idea of how are we uncovering who we are as a community, and how are we also uncovering this legacy of this person that lived quite a long time ago, but has really had a huge impact on many of the people who live there now. And so that's kind of, you know, really interesting, of kind of coming together with community and trying to shift that story, and in that way help people actually see themselves a little bit in that community as it you know, goes forward into the future. So kind of interesting to layer on that idea of that new layer of place in that neighborhood. And then also, I'm really passionate about emerging technologies. So as Cheryl mentioned at the outset, one of my volunteer gigs that I do with my not very much free time is the Spirit Foundation. And so they're actually developing an Indigenous cryptocurrency. It's pretty much done. It's already on Uniswap for anybody who's on there. You know, and I think it's really interesting to be able to kind of imagine the future where Indigenous peoples do have our own currency, which is a way of self-expression, If you want to get into the philosophy of money and store value and transacting, that's really based in our governance principles. So it's a very exciting way to kind of think, into the future and think, what would be a way for our people to kind of, be culturally whole and coherent in that future as well, and paint that exciting new area to go to, and invite anybody who wants to come along as well. So those are the kind of two main things, definitely storytelling.
Well, I hope everyone is as inspired as I am as you hear these women talk about the things that they're working on. And so I'm really looking forward to a lot of the questions that I'm hoping to see in the chat soon. Something that you just said, Jacqueline, really inspired me, and I think it's important. While there's a role of a change leader or a change agent, and that's a very important role that people play, what's the role of community, or what's the role of the customer or the user or the person that benefits from the change? And I know that all of you are aware of my own background in the tech and innovation space, where I, did not engage enough of the community. And so it's really influencing me now as I build my policies, is really to make sure that I'm expansive in bringing in people who have lived experiences and making sure that I'm really heading deep into the community. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. What are your perspectives on community, users of the system, people that benefit from? And maybe Funke, I'll go over to you.
I think it's at the core of everything we do. If you lose the community, you don't have change. If there's no, like Carolyn said, there's a saying that says, if you don't have community buy-in, then you're pretty much wasting your time. And oftentimes we seem to forget that, right? In the work we do, that at the core of it is community. And like I said, I like to design from the margins, design from the ground up. Well, oftentimes we do it the other way around. We design from the top down, right? So I think it's reframing, it's changing that sort of how we approach things going forward. There's so many. I always believe that everyone has something to bring to the table. Every single person. People who have experiential knowledge should always be at the table. And if we're designing for community, then community has to be on the table. And sometimes when we think about community, we always think about geographic communities, right? We have to expand our thinking and our understanding of communities, right? It could be geographic, it could be cultural, it could be virtual. We have virtual communities now, right? In the age of like the pandemic. So I think it's always been intentional. What's your community? Who are you designing for, right? And how can you engage meaningfully and authentically with the community, not just, engaging just because you have to check a box, and learning and leading, and letting the people lead you in that engagement. We always have to let the people and the community drive the change. You don't go in as an expert. You always have to. I always believe in unlearning everything I know before I go into a community, because sometimes everything you know is always going to help you make a mistake. So unlearning and going in as a blank slate and say, you know what, this is a new community. Even when I work within my own cultural community, I go in as a blank slate because there's diversity within those communities, right? Be it geographic or cultural or virtual. So I think it's important that we always engage authentically with community, not just for the sake of engaging.
Yeah, I think I used to do a lot of things wrong. And it took me a long time to learn that connection to community, because I contributed and grew up really in the advertising agency world. And I always felt that I had to have the answers. And now I feel quite gleeful and liberated, because I love to walk in a room and go, I don't have the answer, but what we do have together is we'll collectively figure this out. And that's quite freeing when you say, I don't have the answer, but I have the kernel of an idea, and I think there's something there. But as you pass it off to other people, especially at the very beginning, it becomes something much more beautiful than what you could have ever initially imagined. And someone said to me a long time ago, if you really want to affect change and move something forward, find like-minded people. And they don't have to have the same idea. They just have to be able to, like a diamond is multifaceted, and every person has a piece of that facet to make something that is brilliant for whatever it is, whatever that community is, whatever that idea is or project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I find that it's this real balancing act. You know, you need to bring everybody along and make sure that you're, you know, kind of like capturing the needs and wants and vision of the community, but you also need to have a vision as well, so that you can, you know, you need to be someone too, if you're wanting to lead some change, that is brave enough to kind of seek out and kind of, you know, go alone sometimes into that adjacent possible, and then kind of loop back for everyone to kind of follow back into that new space. And you know, that balancing act, I think, is so important from an accountability practice of just, you know, making sure that you're, you know, not getting too out of line, not getting too big for your britches, but also that you have that relationality as well of, you know, you're being willing to change as well, like along the way. And I think what's really critical from that perspective is, you know, consistently as a change leader, acknowledging your positionality. So, you know, when you're entering into a space and you're in community, you have to remember, just as Carolyn, you were saying, of, you know, making sure that, you know, you're acknowledging kind of all of the, you know, the biases and assumptions and your own lived, you know, your own lived stories as just one among many, and that everyone's are valuable and should contribute and help, you know, kind of shape you in the way that you move forward and get into that adjacent possible and kind of lead people that way. But it is a total balancing act. It's so cyclical, and it's really messy in that way, which is again kind of where, you know, that really important aspect of love needs to be at the core of it, and really good relationships.
Yeah, and I think when you walk in with vision, you have to be able to back up and be able to say when something shifts and it's for the better, and being able to identify that, and that's okay in that space of vulnerability to go, let's go down this path, because then there's a whole bunch of actions, there's a whole bunch of tasks and events that need to go along with that. And you know, that skillful reciprocity of being able to give it out, give it up, and then get it back.
Reciprocity is absolutely the word.
This has been inspiring. Thank you. I have 1,000 thoughts swirling around my head that I'd love to build on. Here's where I'm going to go. We're at about the halfway mark. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to actually be inspired by your conversation points around openness, bringing community along, to talk a little bit about my mayoral campaign for a few minutes here. So Maggie, if you'll give our other 3 participants a little bit of a break from the screen for a minute, I might take over for a couple minutes. So as I said, I'm running to be the mayor of Edmonton, your mayor of Edmonton, and really what that means is that I am looking to expand my experiences, expand my perspective, because I'm going to lean into Carolyn's viewpoint and say, I do not know I don't have all of the answers. Nor can any one person, nor can any one organization have all the answers and all the experiences and all the viewpoints. And so in October of last year, I declared my intent to run for mayor. And why I did that so early, it seemed early, and it seems, you know, a lot of people said it was early, is because I wanted to have the benefit of conversations, the benefit of learnings, the benefit of curiosity. And so I've had hundreds of conversations, and I hope to have thousands and tens of thousands of more conversations from now until October, when our next election is. It's been amazing to learn from everyone what their day-to-day looks like, what their engagement with the city is, what their viewpoint and perspective is. But it is a balancing act, as Jacqueline said, and so I do have a vision for this city. And the vision that I announced recently is that I want to build a city that works. And when I say a city that works, I think about from the very tactical, from the very fact that there should be frictionless payments to get on and use our LRT systems. We shouldn't have to be searching for $3.50. We should be able to tap a device, a card, so that we can use those services easily. All the way to the very aspirational around using the technology strengths. And I know Jacqueline's a big technology fan like I am. to run our city more efficiently, to allow us to have people, rather than manually going around the city and checking whether or not garbage cans need to be emptied, that there's a sensor on that garbage can that tells you when it's full, and you can send the people to go and target that one garbage can to empty it. So through this engagement that I've been having with Edmontonians, I recently announced my first policy a couple of weeks ago, which was a Chief Accountability Officer. And that was a really foundational policy, because it really recognized that we're not the first ones to do city building or to run a city. And there are cities all around the world that I've had the good fortune and benefit, as many of you have, to visit and be inspired by some of the things that they're doing. And while I love this city so much and want to, and have chosen it to build a life and a family and a career here, there are other people that have learned and are the wheel makers in some things that we should be benefiting from their experience. So I announced the Chief Accountability Officer. That could be an independent person or two that could help us to go and search for best practices when City Council has a great idea about what we should be doing to move our city forward. So I encourage all of you to go check out my website, CherylWatson.ca, find out more about me, find out more about my campaign. And because you're all on this call, I'm going to give you a little preview that I'm going to be announcing my next policy tomorrow. And my next policy is going to be really recognizing that our downtown and the core of this city is the economic engine of this city. It's the lifeblood, it's the heart, it is the center that inspires us, that has the density that we don't see in any other part of the city. And great cities really recognize their heart, and they make sure that it's healthy, that it's beating strong, that it's thriving. And so my policy is really going to be aimed at making sure that we have the healthiest heart for our city, so that we can continue to recover together, and our lifeblood can, maybe I will stop this analogy here before, but it's really about making sure that we have a strong core so that the rest of the city can thrive. So please stay tuned for that. Check out my website, follow me on my social platforms. And this might be the right time to introduce Lee, who is a member of my campaign, and she is, hi Lee, she is the Chief Financial Officer, and I think she's going to talk a little bit about what an early campaign looks like from a financial perspective, and really do a great call to action first, and thanks for the many of you that have made donations. But Lee, maybe I'll leave it from here to give you some time to talk.
Sure. Thank you, Cheryl. As Cheryl pointed out, my name is Lee Newton, and I'm honored to be serving as the CFO on Cheryl's mayoral campaign. I hope after hearing from Cheryl and a bit about our vision for the city that you feel compelled, as I do, to help elect the next mayor of Edmonton and come together to create a city that works for all of us now and into the future. Those in politics like to say that campaigns are run on ideas, and I hope you've seen the abundance of ideas that Cheryl brings to the table, but more importantly, the incredible work that she's doing to draw ideas out of Edmontonians, including the brilliant minds that we're hearing from tonight. But that being said, there are some other essential elements to a successful campaign, including volunteers, endorsements, introductions, and of course, financial resources. So often campaigns pick up momentum near the end and the exciting time before Election Day. However, in order to operate, engage the city, and ensure that all Edmontonians are heard and ideas are harnessed, we require financial support up front. So I'm here to ask that if you're in a position to donate right now to the Watson campaign in any way, please visit our website at CherylWatson.ca and click the big pink donate button. And we also have an easy monthly donation solution available for if a lump sum is difficult, as we know these are tough times for many in our community. But also, we want everyone to know that any financial contribution made to our campaign not only helps us in our efforts to connect with voters and engage the community, but also supports our local economy, as our campaign is committed to working with local companies and creators whenever possible. So thank you, and I really hope that anyone who can donate takes this brief break that we're going to have now to go visit the website. As Cheryl said, there's lots more about her ideas and what's going on about that campaign, but also a really easy format to donate directly to that campaign. So I encourage you to go do that and take a short break before the rest of the session.
Lee, thank you. It was great to see you. Thanks for that. Thanks for all the work you're doing to support the campaign. There we go. Donal, I see that Donal's just donated. Thank you. Well, I'm going to give the rest of you 5 minutes. So why don't we all take that time to go make a donation? I'm going to go freshen up my drink, and I will be, and Carolyn and Jacqueline and Funke, we're going to be back at 7:25. So we'll see you then. Okay, welcome back. I hope that you all had a nice little break. You went and refreshed a drink. You made a donation. Thank you again, seriously, for all of your support. It's just great to have you here as part of this conversation. So let's get back to this, because I was super inspired by the first part of the conversation. I can't wait for the next part of it. I want to remind you, because I haven't seen much in the chat for questions. So please send me a DM, or just throw them in the everyone chat, and we'll definitely get to them. So what I'd like to kick us off though. So Maggie, do you want to bring back Carolyn, Jacqueline, and Funke, please? Okay. I'm going to start us off with love. And Jacqueline, I'm going to go to you first, because when was the last time that you had a conversation about something that traditionally might have been thought of as like a business term, change leadership, with the importance of love as something that we all really embrace? So can you talk a little bit more about love and emotion in change?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh gosh, there's so many examples. Honestly, I would even just kind of look back to the land acknowledgement that we all engaged in earlier at the beginning of our chat here, because I think that at the end of the day, to really be engaged citizens in our cities or our towns or our communities, we really need to fundamentally really love being a part of that community. And a really critical aspect of being a part of that community and leading with that love is that, kind of vulnerability as well. And so I think Carolyn, you mentioned that a bit earlier about how important that kind of vulnerability is in leading change, and kind of noticing when maybe your idea in a very kind of Copernican way, perhaps isn't right, isn't working, and being willing to kind of shift and change how you're leading that that shift in the first place. So I know that for me, vulnerability is such a word of strength when you are leading change, and kind of fits really nicely with that idea of reciprocity that we were talking about earlier as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, the joys of technology. Sorry, I thought I was just hearing myself speak. So yeah, no, actually, Jacqueline, that makes total sense. And in my journey, I've come to see vulnerability as a strength too. Oftentimes we see it as a weakness, and being vulnerable, and it means, you're giving up something. It's some of your power, who has power anyway, but I think it's also, in order to connect authentically, again, going back to the word love, right? And love is situated in relationships. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to share some of yourself, right? I look at it this way. When you're leading, oftentimes we show off our trophies. Hey, look what I did. But you also have to be willing to show off your battle scars. And sometimes those scars are way more than the trophies you get, right? So again, it's being open and honest, and being willing to connect authentically, with the person that you're dealing with as well. So yeah, I agree totally, Jacqueline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyone have any battle scars they'd be willing to share? Maybe not show off, but share.
What time do you have? We'd be here all night.
Oh gosh.
Carolyn, do you have a particular moment of vulnerability, or a moment of uncertainty, or a moment of like, oh my God, I've made a huge mistake?
Oh gosh.
And I name those things because I'm like,
time.
well, I think of it. Yeah, I was thinking myself of all of these examples, but do you want to share?
Oh, maybe I'll share it in the sense that, being creative is about exposure, because you have to expose your ideas and be open to criticism, and accept that criticism as a way forward, and adapt and adopt and move on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be tough to do, but exposure is an interesting word, because when we expose our ideas, we are exposing part of ourself, and there is that vulnerability. And I've learned over the years that I have to separate myself from that. that my ideas are not my personality. My ideas are a product. And if I can put that forward and remove myself from it, then I can have a healthy conversation about the idea itself and not feel that the criticism is directed at me, but it's at the idea. And then I don't own the idea anymore so much. There is a sense of that exposure that opens you up to vulnerability. And if you can accept that by separating yourself from it, then that's okay. Because, you know, when you go into rooms, and sometimes I'm in the rooms with generals, or sometimes I'm in the room with, you know, all kinds of folks. And perhaps that asset is that I think differently and not the same way. And we talked about this earlier, that, you know, you do bring something different in that diversity of thinking.
Yeah.
When you are not the same. And that's a good way of, when you want to move something forward, don't go to the next person who thinks exactly like you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I, reflecting more, Carolyn, when you were talking, I actually kind of went the opposite way in some ways. I was thinking about, so not last winter, but the winter before, me and my brother, we staged our first play called Lake of the Strangers. And it was my first thing. Thank you. It was the first thing I'd ever written in my life. And it was like a full play. Long story how we got there. It was a really weird kind of bounce moment. But what I thought was so amazing was kind of when you're kind of, at least for me, when my back was up against a wall and you know, trying to tell a story that I really wanted to be honest, because at the very least, if you're honest, nobody can really question that. You get really deeply personal. And actually, I found myself kind of, you know, going back to the idea of vulnerability, kind of taking off, you know, the kind of armor, the kind of, the things that you perhaps put on, that you're, you know, that you're strong, that you know what you're doing, that, you know, if something happens and you hadn't anticipated it, like you can get up and you're fine and you come back stronger. And I felt like I was kind of removing all of these things in trying to tell this really true story. And what I found is that the more kind of nuanced and specific I got with the story I was trying to tell, like my fears, I just basically kind of threw up everything that I never want to share with anybody on a stage. And almost like the kind of feedback that I got, which I loved the most, and then I actually got a few times, was how universal the story was. And I thought that it just really showed how sometimes like what you might perceive as the hyper personal is actually the most universal. And I think especially with things like pain or uncertainty, you know, those are the things that we sometimes find are actually the things that most people are just like, oh, I see that. And I think that's, you know, when you're going back to the idea of authenticity, that's really where that authenticity comes from, is showing up and having that vulnerability. And you know, and I imagine there's, you know, obviously times and places for these kinds of things. The theater is a great place to be super honest in front of people, but you know, that's kind of what came to me first, and just the kind of power that comes from that kind of showing and sharing, and also in the kind of trust now that I have for the world to kind of catch me if I am being honest and vulnerable and sharing these things.
Well, this is really resonating with me, and also terrifying for me right now as I think about this next role that I'm about to embark on, and just even campaigning, being out there in a very public way, opening myself up to people. This is the most vulnerable I've ever been in my life, and I've been in some pretty vulnerable moments, as you know, Carolyn, you've seen that, and Jacqueline, you've seen that recently. I'm scared, but I'm really sticking and firmly holding strong on that I don't know all the answers, and being able to say that I am vulnerable in this moment, and being able to declare and being very honest throughout this process, because I have to be. I don't, you know, I'm a Brene Brown fan, and so when I hear things like putting on your armor, I don't want to put on my armor through this time period, but I know there will be moments where I will have to. So anyway, this is really resonating for me. I appreciate the opportunity to hear from each of you in those moments when you've been really vulnerable as well. So it's been inspiring. you know, emotion, vulnerability, these are typically things you don't hear men talk about. Do you think that women have a superpower when it comes to leadership, when it comes to leading change, when it comes to building community? Anyone?
We have lots of superpowers.
Well, for sure.
I feel like I was just talking for a while, but I kind of, I would almost kind of say too that like it's not just men as well. Like I think that we've all been so socialized that like our emotions and these things are things that are kind of for our private lives, and that they have no place kind of when the chips are down. And that kind of empathy, that kind of vulnerability is so critical for us to kind of model, not just for ourselves as we try to lead our communities into change, but also, you know, modeling the behaviors that we want to for the young ones that are coming up, that are, you know, looking at us for, you know, what is a good change making look like. So that's what comes to mind for me first. And I think that there is, you know, sometimes a utility to that vulnerability and showing up and being your true authentic self and saying, I don't know. But, you know, it's tough to be able to highlight that, because it's one of those things that like once things kind of, you know, end up at the, you know, in a successful place, I think that we kind of forget sometimes the pathway that we took to get there. So yeah, but I think it's a total cultural thing, and that we all need to shift our way towards that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I do think that that women and femme identifying folks, like, you know, we tend to have these kinds of values around emotionality and, you know, bringing together community, that kind of, you know, there's the fight and flight and there's the tend to befriend that women and femme identifying folks tend to have. So like, how do we kind of, you know, show and make, you know, spaces okay for us to do that tending and befriending, and it not seem like you're kind of copping out from showing up to, you know, kind of fight whatever fight that needs to be fought.
Thank you for helping me with my language as well. I appreciated that you said women and feminine identifying. So thanks for saying that, Jacqueline. I think that's good framing for this conversation. I just wanted to interject in there and say that, you know, Nick just had a very interesting question that I think is related to this conversation. So Nick's question for everyone, and maybe we'll go to Funke first so she can prep as I'm reading out the question. When you have to put on your armor, and maybe you don't, and I'm curious about this, do you feel like you have to sacrifice part of what makes you the person you are in order to project an image to others? So do you put on armor?
I think we do, absolutely. Oftentimes when you're trying to navigate, it's again, going back to your idea of having a superpower, right? You know, we're trying to navigate different spaces, and then we have to sort of like think, in this space, what am I called to be? Who am I called to be, right? What am I called to do? Definitely sometimes when we put on an armor, we feel like we're giving up a little bit of ourselves, absolutely. But you have to, it's being intentional and recognizing, why are you putting on that armor? What is it for? What are you trying to achieve, right? So I think when I do that personally, it's because there's a certain expectation of me in that space. You know, am I able to get the project or get the goals met in that space based on the armor I'm putting on? But whenever I put on an armor, I often try to always be grounded and never lose my values, you know, and never lose what gives me the strength to keep doing what I do. So irrespective of, I mean, sometimes, like Cheryl, you were saying, we still have to do that. In those rooms and spaces where you're called to know, of course, you definitely stand like, yes, I'm the one wanting to lead the city, but, you know, there's always going to be that but. And in that but, I never lose my values. I'll always stay true to who I am and those who I represent. You know, oftentimes, like I said, I work with cultural minority and racialized families, and oftentimes they don't have a voice. So if I put on that armor and that armor stifles my voice, you're stifling the voice of so many. You're stifling the stories of so many who have trusted me with those stories and who have trusted me to stand in their place. So it's a fine balance, like Jacqueline was saying earlier on, or how to do that balance with intentionality is always the key thing as a leader.
Well, especially in a lot of the language that you're using, Funke says you're a servant leader, and so you're representative of those that you serve. But yet to that point, how do you still inspire confidence? How do you still at least start out in a direction so that you're not all just standing still? But I really appreciated a lot of the language and values. Values are so important. I'm a values-based leader. I talk a lot about my values to my team. And it's really important, I think, as you make decisions, as you move forward, that you're constantly checking how you're making decisions and how you're thinking about things by testing against your values. And then as well, when you're representing a community, how do you determine whether there's a values match at times?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting, when we talk about armor, because I look at armor as protection. And if I'm going into a room and I feel that I put armor on, the reason I'm doing that is because I might not be confident. I might not have done my homework. I might not feel that I know the information that I'm talking about, that I should be talking about. I should have been a little bit more studied. So the armor for me is protection. But but then it compromises who I am. It compromises my authenticity, and then it trips me up because I'm trying to cover up for that confidence. So, and I don't know if it's because I'm old or maybe have learned some things along the way, but I don't feel I have to wear armor as much anymore. Ideas are currency, and if the idea is good, then, and you're passionate about it and you speak with joy about it, then it will come across with that EQ and that IQ. So I try not to put armor on. I just try to do my homework. And if you walk in and they don't like it, they don't like it. I mean, that's okay. It's not that it has to have a positive outcome every time, because change leads from one thing to another, and it's accumulative. So whatever you put out there, it's still going to move something forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really resonate with that as well. And I also wonder, I wonder if a good kind of alternative to armor can be like this idea, like, why do we always think that we can only be one thing? Like the quote that comes to mind is like from Rumi. It's like, stop acting so small, you're the universe in ecstatic motion. And I wonder if sometimes we feel, that we can't just kind of show facets of ourselves. And I wonder if that can kind of help thread that needle of, we can't be all these different roles, all these different hats that we wear. So I wonder if we can kind of, start to situate ourselves as like, I am competent, but I also don't know about, this specific topic.
Right.
And that's what I adopt a lot in my work. It's just kind of like, I can be multiple things and I can show different parts of myself.
Yeah, it's that dichotomy too.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes society calls on us to put on that armor, right? So sometimes we go into spaces, we're just ready with that armor on. Sometimes, depends on where your social location is, right? So it's sometimes it's for protection based on how you have been placed or how you're situated in society as well sometimes. So it's sometimes unconscious actually, so that's why intentionality is important when you're trying to create change.
Funke, I think it's true, is sometimes we unconsciously put armor on, in those moments when we don't anticipate something and we're caught off guard. And then that's when armor comes on sometimes. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I know for me, it's not so much of a consciously putting armor on as much as it is like, oh, I'm wearing a suit of armor all of a sudden, like gotta take these things off. Yeah, totally.
You find yourself defensive as well in situations, like you fall into behaviors as well that demonstrate that you're wearing your armor.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're human beings, maybe.
Almost.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Well, speaking of human beings, I talked about one of my heroes, one of my mentors is Brene Brown, for many, many reasons, and she's inspired me at many moments of my life. Do any of you have heroes, mentors, people that inspire you that you'd like to share, talk about?
I've
Such a
had a
good
fantastic mentor. Her name is Val Brandt. I don't think anyone knows of her, but she is a storyteller. She's a playwright. She writes operas. She writes choruses, lyrics. She used to be in advertising, and she had a very funny joke which said that if she ever wrote a chapter in a book, it would be 30 seconds because that's how long a radio spot is. But she's been a fantastic mentor, and I fly out to Vancouver when we used to be able to do things like that, to sleep on her sofa. And I would always feel so refreshed because she's almost 80 now. And her sister she lives with her sister, and her sister used to be a national ballet dancer. We call her the diva, but they provide such salient, insightful advice, and they would just, they shake me out of my, my habits, and just be able to say, Carolyn, you're just not living up to your potential. and it's kind of like a readjustment when you have a really good mentor. It's just a gut check and a recalibration every once in a while. And I have such love and admiration for their talent, their collective talent. They're two very accomplished ladies. So, and I've been friends with them for like 35 years. Yeah. It's nice to have that.
Funke, what about you? I agree, Carolyn, like that. Sorry, thanks. I'd need to do a better job of transitioning. Yes, that was inspiring. Those sound like lovely human beings that are in your life, Carolyn. Funke, do you have similar human beings in your life like that?
I do. I actually have lots of human beings because for me, I'm a product of a community, right? So I stand here with many, many people who I see life as a symbiotic relationship, right? There's people always informing and I'm growing and learning every day. But there's two amazing women I walk this path every day with here in the city of Edmonton. So all of the work I do are not my own. They're sort of like a group of people. We do this work together. We cry together. We share together. We fail together, right? But the two women who inspired me and really set me on this path when I came to Edmonton is Yvonne Chu and Monique Nodder. And they inspire me to do this work with my heart, my soul every single day. And they're a force to sort of reckon with it when it comes to intercultural practices and just reframing and changing the narrative of cultural minority and racialized individuals every day here in the city of Edmonton. And we do the great work and we make the magic happen together. So I'm really blessed to have both of them in my life and all the many people, Abby is here today as well. We share so many joys, so many things together as well. I'm surrounded by great women, actually, powerful, very strong women in my life that I can relate to. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Jacqueline.
Yeah, so I know for me, the first person that came to my mind was my mom. So she's just one of my favorite people on the planet. So much of my work and, trying to do hard things as much as I can. I always kind of look to my mom and see how much she leads from a place of warmth and generosity and selflessness. And I find myself always inspired by that. And, raising myself and my brother was not an easy task. So that just speaks to, again, the strength of my mom. And she's just the best. She's a brilliant lady.
Lucky we're recording this because then you can share. Hopefully you'll get to hear your words recognizing. Because as a mom, sometimes you don't always get to hear those really kind words from your kids. I also have so many incredible women in my life that I'm inspired by, in addition to Brene Brown, and the three of you I would count in that circle. And I'll share a little bit about the origin of these conversations. Started in, I think it was December 2019. I realized that originally, early in my career, I used to think a mentor was a really formal thing. You had one person, they had to declare that they were your mentor, and there was this whole formal process of them being your mentor. And then as my career has progressed and I've evolved a little bit, I realized that people can just have hundreds of mentors in their life. And it's a mentor in a moment, a mentor that you might not even know because there's someone that you just listen to on a podcast. And I realized that I had about actually 100 women mentors that I would contact or reach out to or engage with in different ways. And so I invited them all to one of our restaurants in downtown, and I shared some of my stories with them, a little bit of my history and growing up in Edmonton, some of my early years, and helped them to understand what shaped me as a person. And I let them all know that they were my mentors. And I asked them all if they would collectively join me in helping to lift other women up and be mentors to other women back, not in this formal way, but in a very informal way, to create this room of mentors for each other. And that was really what inspired this conversation. And so as I shared with all of you, I had one on Valentine's Day, and I really hope to continue this practice. And I would call in all three of you to as well think about creating a collective of women mentors. And I hope that everyone on this that's part of this conversation will take that same viewpoint. How can we reach out to people to learn from, people that we respect, people that we admire, that we see are leading change, that are vulnerable, that are courageous, that are willing to share? And how can we be great mentors to them as well? So that almost feels like a great point to leave this conversation. And that is with gratitude to the three of you, with gratitude to all of the people that have been a part of my life, and I hope to continue to be. So all of you that are on this call, thank you very much for tonight. I know that there are many people that have left some comments, some questions that might not necessarily be related to change leadership. And so here's what I'd ask. I'm gonna ask Maggie right now to post the link that I shared with her in the channel for all of you. If you click on this, it's gonna take you to a link that will give you access to directly meeting time with my calendar. You just have to fill in your information. You get a live link so that you can schedule at your convenience. There was a lot of great questions in the chat that I felt probably might be more related to maybe my opinions and perspectives as I embark on this mayoral campaign. So I would please encourage you all, if you haven't yet, and I know many of you have, because I recognize a lot of you, yet scheduled a conversation, please do. I want to learn from you. I want to hear the questions that you think are important that I should have an opinion on. And if I don't yet, help me to become more educated, help me in my curiosity quest to really expand my viewpoints, perspective. I really appreciate all of you, and I look forward to continuing to learn from you and to be a great servant leader that reflects all of the things that are important to you and your perspectives, and as well be a strong, courageous, armorless leader that takes our city forward into a strong and prosperous future. So please join me in building a city that works collectively, that serves all of us in a way that creates an equitable environment for this city and recognizes the importance of diversity of lived experience and all of the different perspectives, viewpoints that we bring. I hope to serve you. So thank you very much, everyone. We've been recording this session, and so we're gonna share it again so that you can go back and be inspired like I was tonight by these three women. And again, I end with gratitude to all of you, and I look forward to more conversations. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Good night.